Good to be here. You know, I'm the only person in the company that's been around 36 years and they're not sure what I do. And I'm not going to tell them. And there's another gentleman in the front is not sure what I do either.
I'm not sure what I do.
Well, we both came the same year. He was on the West Coast, I was on the Canadian border. He was really worried, but I peaked in '53. And when we talk about the company, so many people ask the question, how did you get interested? Well, when I was running up and down the East Coast, I used to do a lot of studying. We do study out there once in a while at a place called Princeton. And one night in going through the files, because I am professionally nosy, I saw the word Upjohn, and I wanted to find out what it was. And here it was a thesis done back in 1932 on the early family. And in that thesis, it said that W.E. Upjohn just might have a little Welsh in him. Now, I'm full-blooded Welsh. There's not many of us. There was Tom Jones, Richard Burton, and me. And that was an emotional experience to think that there was some Welsh that maybe made it, because we haven't had many winners. In fact, we're the only race that never lost a war. We changed sides. And therefore, to tell you the little thoughts that I've ran across, I've got to go back in time, and I've got to go back really to look for the roots of this company. Now, you know, I was thinking the other day, in 1886, this company did $50,000. 1912, it did its first million. 1956, shortly after I had arrived, it did 100 million. 1976, 1,084,200,000. And you almost have to say, how did it survive? And how did it grow that way? What are the roots? Are there roots? And therefore, in talking about roots, I've got to go back in time. And I've got to go back to the time of Dickens, really, and I got to go to England in a little town called Shaftesbury, about 105 miles south of London. And there was a family that had come from South Wales, and their name was Upjohn, A-P-J-O-N. And of course, like true Welsh, they were there a short period, and it became Upjohn. And the man I want to talk about there is a man named William Upjohn, and he's an interesting study. And of course, I got a verification he was Welsh because he married Mary Standard and had 12 children, and that's a Welsh problem. And he was a civil engineer. He also was one of the early preachers in the John Wesleyan movement. And by the way, he preached at a church in Shaftesbury for 30 years and never took a salary. I haven't found a preacher that likes that yet. And they had the good life, and he had educated his children, but he didn't think there was going to be an opportunity. So in 1828, he took his two eldest sons, William and Uriah, and he sent them to the great United States, and he said, see if there's a place and an opportunity for the children there. And they went to Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio. In fact, in 1828, Uriah was the school teacher in Erie, PA. And they went back, and they said, yes, New York State would be the place. And then we saw the first great Upjohn salesman. Old William talked 11 of the 12 children in coming with him, and they were 15 to 35. And they came, and they sailed on the William Byrne. And they landed in New York, and by the way, as engineers, you'd probably be interested in this, they spent their first month with Richard Upjohn, old William's younger brother, who had came in 1829. Now, he was the architect on Trinity Church, famous Trinity in New York City. He got the contract 1839, finished it in 1846. By the way, he and his sons built churches all the way to Buffalo. And they also were the architects on the Capitol building for the state of Connecticut. And you might be interested that the church that is closest to a copy of their work is the Episcopal Church in Allegan. And then they went on north, and they settled first at Pittsburgh, right outside of Albany. And while he was there, he sent the two boys down to the New York College of Surgeons under the directorship of a Dr. Hale. And then he heard about the Erie Canal. It had just been finished in 1827. And being an engineer, he wanted to live on it, so he went to Pittsford, right outside of Rochester, and he settled the family. And when the boys got back, they were going to start practicing there, but, you know, it was go west, young man, go west. Down the Erie Canal was the route. Got to Detroit, turn left, it was Winston-Salem. Turn right, it was Kalamazoo. They turned right. And they pitched a tent on lot Northeast 31 in Richland. Now, a lot of people said, why did they come to Kalamazoo? And I would like to suggest this, and it's accepted by many as very logical. All immigrants in those days went towards something they knew. And from Schoolcraft to Richland was Prairie Rhonda or Rhonda Prairie. The most fertile valley in Wales for a farm family is Rhonda Valley. And they were here, and Uriah, he wanted to practice medicine. William, he wanted to farm. But Uriah started and did a 30-mile circuit around Kalamazoo and got so busy that William joined him, and then William went over to Hastings to practice. And then we saw true Welsh again, because this gentleman, Uriah, saw a little girl in Richland. Her name was Maria Mills. They got married, and they had 12 children. And it's fascinating when you look at the study of this family as where did the roots, where did the farm love come from? Uriah taught his children himself at home, even though he was active with his practice and a very busy practice, even though he belonged to the anti-slavery movement and the free soil movement. He educated them at home, and he taught them the biology and the chemistry and the farming of the day and the work ethic of the day. And then he was the first man to beat the high cost of education, because when he got time to go to school, they had finished the local work here, he went down to the University of Michigan, rented a house across the street, and then later bought it. And as many as 8 children went to college at one time. And the clothes were shipped back on the railroad from Galesburg, and so was the food. In fact, if we look at those children tied to the health industry, we'd see Amelia and then Mary. These were the first 2 female graduates from the School of Pharmacy at the University of Michigan, 1871. In fact, Mike Shannon and I have been doing some work trying to find 2 female pharmacists maybe somewhere in the United States who had graduated from an accredited school earlier, and we have not been able to. Then Helen went down as chaperone of the family. She thought she was there, she might as well do a little something, so she got her degree in medicine in 1872. Henry was 28 when he joined the family down at the University of Michigan. He probably was a mechanical genius. He had, before his 25th birthday, over 25 farm patents to his credit. In fact, the corn planter of the day was Henry's design. He sold McCormick a knot tying machine in 1863 for $1,500. You know what $1,500 was in 1863? And so he went down and got his degree in medicine. Now I have Fred up. Best I can do for Fred is 1 semester at pharmacy, but boy, do I relate to Fred. And then behind him is James. James got his degree in 1885 in medicine. But the person here we're here to talk about was W.E. He didn't go down right away. In fact, when he finished the local schools, went to Kalamazoo on North Burdick Street and worked in a pharmacy there, the Babcock Pharmacy. And then his interest in medicine and health care, and he went down and got his degree in medicine in 1875. He was going to go over and practice with Uncle William in Hastings. But first he came back to Kalamazoo, and he went back to that pharmacy, and he married the daughter of that pharmacist. And he and Rachel Babcock, from that marriage, had 4 children: Winifred, Harold, Dorothy, and Genevieve. And he went to Hastings and began his practice. And while he was there, the delivery system of medicine of the day began to upset him, because most of the pills were hard, gummy compounds that hardened, went straight on through and out on the 7 o'clock shift and did nobody any good. And as he began to experiment then in his own home, and as he wrote, he said the impulse he had was to produce something better adapted from both cost and production for the use of the country physician. And let's not forget then, he was a country physician. And as he worked with it, he said, I had been experimenting, departing entirely from the traditional way of making mass pills and making something which would be entirely different in structure. If I had followed the beaten path, I never would have succeeded. And his end result was a method of aggregating drugs in a globular form. What he was doing was taking a nuclei, throwing in his active ingredient, under moisture rolling them so that you could crush them with the thumb. Crush them with the thumb. On October the 19th, 1884, he applied for his patent, was granted on February the 10th, 1885, and was patent number 312041. And he began to make him in his home for physicians. And then he took over an old mill in Hastings, and he was going to go into manufacturing. And then he wrote Brother Henry over in Kalamazoo, because Brother Henry was practicing downtown. Let's get realistic. Brother Henry had the money. In fact, he owned what was called Upjohn blocks, which are our present mall. And they talked about the possibility of manufacturing mass pills, the friable pill. And so he come over, and originally Henry went into business with him. Then James and Fred wanted in, so originally we had Henry, the financial banker and business advisor, W.E. president, Fred in charge of manufacturing, and Fred, by the way, was very talented mechanically. James, the baby, was also in manufacture and probably the chief gopher, because the youngest child is always the gopher. And they started right down on the mall, in a storefront. Their emblem was the friable pill. It was W.E.'s thumb. I've had the picture, or the privilege of seeing this original picture, and you know there's some dirt under the nails. That make you feel good. He liked the soil and he was human. There was dirt under the nails. In fact, his thumb was used on our product in some form until 1945. The friable pill, crushed under the thumb. 1886, first plant. Henry's money, built it on Farmer's Alley, right behind Burdick Street. Also in 1886, the first price list, or the first catalog. Also in 1886, the first salesman, William Wesley Booth. Got $60 a month. President of the company was getting 100. I like that ratio. What happened? In 1887, a major catastrophe for the company. Typhoid fever hit the Kalamazoo area, and Brother Henry was a casualty. They had lost then their financial backer. They had lost their business advisor. And so to meet this challenge, they incorporated as a stock company and floated $60,000 in common stock, the majority of shares going in the hands of the three brothers, Fred, James, and W.E. The rest purchased by physicians in the town, pharmacists in the town. You know, a Coca-Cola is 100 years old this year also. I get a kick out of F.W. Werner. That's Fred Werner, Detroit, pharmacist. Also was the man who established Werner's ginger ale. He was a stockholder of the original 20. Friable pill at first wasn't overly attractive. It was kind of dull. But the brothers, in their ingenuity and in their manufacturing ability, and sometimes we forget that they had to design their own packaging machines. They had to design their own pill counters. They had to do all of these things. They soon found a way to polish it, color it, and make it look as attractive as ever. And it might be appropriate here to talk a little bit about this company, because we've got to remember it was a family company. I don't forget having the privilege of talking with Dorothy, and as I said, well, you know, Dorothy, as a little girl, what about the company? What happened? She said, oh, she said, well, maybe I'd go down and climb up next to Aunt Edna, who kept the books and draw pictures. Or maybe she said we and my brothers and sisters and some of the other children around would go down and we'd go in the back and pound corks in the bottles. Now, here we are today in this magnificent machine. You don't think of children walking around pounding corks in the bottles. It was a family company. In fact, W.E., as L.N. said in his papers, always found a position for a member of the family. And that position seemed to correlate very much with the abilities. So because you were Upjohn didn't mean you were a success within the company. You had to earn your right. 1902, this is an artist concept of the Upjohn Company, and I have to admit, as I look at it, I think he got a little enthused. But they were a success. In fact, they were such a success that, and their pricing was pretty economical, that the president of Park Davis down the road used to refer to it as that farmer's company up the road. That used to upset W.E. The farmer's company up the road. And then the first major catastrophe hit. Another product, another delivery system, because the friable pill is a better way to use drugs, a delivery system. Another delivery system hit the marketplace, and that was a compressed tablet. And that gave greater flexibility in dosage. And W.E. immediately responded and made some very, very, I think, dramatic changes. Change one. And this is his picture, by the way, in the 1890s. He went to group management 60 years before it became popular in the business. And he did it very simply. He said, we, the Upjohn Company, everything we do will be group effort. No man will succeed or fail. We will succeed or fail. And then he took that small sales force, and it was a pretty small one then, and he increased it as rapidly as he could. And he didn't want people from another company. He wanted young men who could develop. And I think it's interesting to read is what his hiring philosophy was. He said, I would hire a fine young man, assign him a job, tell him his responsibility, give him a free hand, occasional counseling, and very little criticism, and everything's going to be all right. And then he pointed out over and over to his people, there are no supermen. And then he knew that the future was going to depend on quality, and he began by talking about a product must be true to the label. And then that led to keep the quality up, which we have around so much today. And then he changed the name of the company from the Upjohn Pill and Granular Company to the Upjohn Company. It's fascinating to think in the past as to how, at least I as a salesman, and I know Larry will think of this, the difference in today, the technology today versus then. Then you'd probably go in, you'd ask a doctor, and you see his pills, and you'd ask him for a couple, and he'd hand you a couple, and you'd take them out, and you'd pound them into a board. In fact, I've seen where they used to shoot them through fence posts. No wonder they went straight through. I've had the privilege of talking to some of the older people, the older salespeople, where, you know, you went to a town on the road and you made a deal with the engineer. He tooted the whistle twice when you had 3 minutes to get back to the train. Or when Leo Austin went to Portland and rode the lumber wagons. But that's how it went. 1905, a catastrophe hit the family. As you know, he bought these grounds in 1895, at least the first piece. 1902 got the section here where the house is. In 1905, Rachel, his wife, passed away, July 4th. And you can almost see this is where some of his interest in flowers began to really generate, or he took more time with them then. Developed over 60 strain of peonies. By the way, he went into the flower business for a short period, had coolers out in the fields. At one point, there were 42 acres of peonies out here, 20 on one side of the road, 22 on the other. One of his tap roots would go for $75. I can't help but think of the flowers and think of his statement as he said, of the human joys, the joy of beauty is the one most universally demanded and gives the most universal satisfaction. 1906. We had a little disagreement among the brothers. And really, if you looked at it, it was really, as I have interpreted it, a disagreement in philosophy. I have to say this, if James had his way, we'd be another Perigo. Fred was basically interested in a little company he had on the side called Sidney Ross. And W.E. wanted to make it bigger, so he took the gamble. He bought his brothers out at a very, very high price for the marketplace in those days. And this was all done by 1908. And the picture did not look dramatically well. Looked a little cloudy. But then in 1908, another product came into the market, a product called Phenolax, first flavored laxative in the American marketplace. And they had to design machinery here to have a different shape. I get a kick out of a number of slides I have. It's not this one, but one of them shows the old Phenolax, and a sign on it says, "No substitution in this store." So they had the problem in those days. And it was a success. In fact, it was our first product. We sampled the whole United States, every physician. It was our first product that we had our first out of stock. And then in 1910, they opened the Kansas City branch. And in 1911, they opened the San Francisco, became a branch. 1911 also came the major fire of the Upjohn Company, building number 4, and that had spread to 1 and 11. In fact, that fire, insurance remuneration, helped pay some of the very heavy bills of the company and got some new modern equipment. It also brought about in June of that year, the fire took place in March, the hiring of a man named Lewis Crockett, who was going to be our builder. In fact, before his career was done, he had built 75, or involved in 75 building projects for the company. And then in 1912, we tried the candy business for a while with a thing called Kazoo Mints. That was our second patented name. Now, we were using, and that was about the time of the Food and Drug, we were using a pharmaceutical starch which had not been cleared for candy, so we went out of the candy business very, very quickly. 1913, 2 major things happened. W.E. Upjohn married Carrie Gilmore, James Gilmore's widow. And that merged 2 major families in Kalamazoo. Carrie had 3 sons, Stanley, Irving, and Donald. W.E. had 4 children, Winifred, Harold, Dorothy, and Genevieve. But the other thing that happened was the acquiring of our first researcher, Fred Heil. This is his laboratory under the little white building downtown. In fact, it's fascinating to me when you think of research in those days. As W.E. said, this is going to cost me $50,000 before it brings any results, and I don't know where the money's coming from. But in 1914, the first published paper from the laboratories of the Upjohn Company appeared in the American Journal of Pharmacy, and it was notes on estimations of nitroglycerin. Then in 1916, a little thing happened which turned out to be a very positive force in this company. Donald Gilmore, Carrie's son, married W.E.'s daughter Genevieve, and even further merged 2 major families in the Kalamazoo area. Now, he did not come with the Upjohn Company then. He was busy building Gilmore's, and he had Gilmore's as kind of a going Jenny in my wordage. He had stores in Grand Rapids, Battle Creek, Kalamazoo, Sturgis, Niles. In 1917, we began making sterile products. 1919, the first product from the research of the Upjohn Company, Digitora, digitalis, that didn't deteriorate easily. 1921, citrocarbonate, the first $1 million a year product of the Upjohn Company. Now, W.E. is beginning to withdraw from the company. In fact, back in 1910, 1909 and 10, he had brought his son Harold in. And one of Harold's first responsibilities was to trying to get a cost accounting system going. In fact, W.E.'s instructions to him was, why not spread all of our cost over all of the product and business we do? And that became a tradition in the industry later on. 1924, Cherokol. And this was another interesting situation, and it was a very startling thing. In fact, Cherokol's original name wasn't Cherokol, it was Cheradyne. And there was a product on the market which we have not been able to find out what was in it, but it was called Chlorodyne. And this had been on the market, Cheradyne had been on the market 2 months when a doctor wrote a prescription for it, and the pharmacist filled it with Chlorodyne, and the patient died. W.E. immediately withdrew Cherokol Cheradyne from the marketplace and brought it back 3 months later as Cherokol. But I think there's one point here he makes, and maybe we all should take this point. He said, here was something that happened that we had no control over. Bad luck. And then he made a statement which has meant a lot to me. Make the most of good luck. Make the best of bad luck. And this then became a very popular product. 1927, we had our first nutritional laboratory. 1928, and I put up heparin. Harold, who had really been taking over and was the heir apparent as W.E. withdrew in the 20s, had a hernia operation. In those days, they laid you flat on your back, and when they stood him up, an embolism clot killed him. The heir apparent was gone. W.E. had to come back into the company, but the researchers downtown, there was about 20 of them at that time, were determined that they would do something about a clot, and it ended in 1942 with the release of lung heparin, an anticoagulant. W.E. came back into the company. He has to get a new heir apparent. And he did an interesting thing here. He asked his sales managers, and there was one in New York, and there was one in Kansas City, and there was one in San Francisco, to send him 6 months of their business correspondence. You read somebody's mail for 6 months, you'll pick a president. And he picked L.N. Now, L.N. is an interesting study. In 1902, he was teaching anatomy at the University of Oklahoma. He also was the basketball coach, and basketball had just started. And he had a bunch of football players as basketball players. In the Oklahoma papers, they say very simply, he made them bounce the ball. Maybe Upjohn started to dribble, I don't know. But he brought to the company and to Kalamazoo education of the salesmen, conferencing, background information for them, and he was the new president. And then he talked that son-in-law, or stepson, into coming with the Upjohn Company, Donald Gilmore. Here was another builder. You know, we had, and I look at it from the sales point of view, we had 3 branches. New York, which opened in 1890, which Fred was the sales manager. Kansas City, 1910. San Francisco, 1911, where Walter Selman was the sales manager. 1931, after Donald came, we had Memphis. 1934, we had Kalamazoo. 1935, we had Toronto and Dallas. 1936, we had Atlanta. 1938, Cleveland. 1940, Boston. 1941, Minneapolis. He was a builder, an expander, a make it grow. October the 18th, 1932, W.E. Upjohn's career ended. But his philosophy was ingrained. It was embedded in the company. This was the man that said, we, the Upjohn Company. He said very much to his people, the more fears we work up, the less initiative we have. Do not create fear, create hope. He said, honesty is the essence of ethic. Knowledge is the possession of facts. Wisdom is the ability to use them. Man is what he is, not what he was or will be. Now is what matters, not yesterday nor tomorrow. He pointed out that good many times is the enemy of best. Then he balanced it. He said good many times is overlooked in seeking best. So don't advertise the house, advertise the product. There are no Supermen. Keep the quality up. In learning, he said, knowledge rather than shrewdness. Boy, something it took a long time for me to learn. All life is a compromise. I thought humorously he pointed out that man is a germ of divinity operating under limitations. He said science is the effort of the finite mind to comprehend the workings of the infinite, and at best the results are half-truths, likened unto a broken and scattered string of pearls, each pearl no less a gem, though the string be incomplete. When Harold died, he designed that big congregational church window downtown. I can think of that and hear him say, if there is any human need which demands our best efforts, a structure for worship. But we're here in business. We maybe have to talk business. And all this come out of his little white office. But he felt that a corporation has a responsibility to the personnel of that corporation, to the accounts they do business with, and to the community in which that corporation lives. He believes so much in full employment. In fact, it's written so many times that when there wasn't work to do, they cleaned the windows, and we probably had the cleanest windows in any state in the United States. He had insurance for all employees with dependents in 1915. When you think of the hot meal served here, starting with mashed potatoes, which were free, by the way, until about 1953. But then you think of vested rights, and you think of the Upjohn Award. And this, by the way, the Upjohn Award, appeared in his will, where he took his stock and set it aside. And 5 years after his death, he said it should be granted to the dedicated, productive employee. Or you think of the accounts, and maybe he put it this way, that all accounts should have fair and just treatment. Maybe that's why we're considered to have the fairest credit policies, the fairest return good policies, the one catalog. Or the community in which he lived. In 1905, he was on the town council, also was treasurer of the Michigan Car Company. 1915 was on the Chamber of Commerce. 1918, he was the first mayor of Kalamazoo. And he put his finances where his philosophy was, and you had the Civic Center and the maintenance of sporting areas such as Millam Golf Course. Or you think in the Depression when he went out and he bought the farms. Because he said the best you can do for people who need help is to supply them work. And anyone then who had a problem could apply to farm a piece of those grounds and either eat it or sell it. In fact, that developed into two basic things, the Kalamazoo Foundation and the Upjohn Institute, which of course his major responsibility is to study unemployment and the correction thereof. In fact, the day he died, the schools closed and the trolleys didn't run. If I had to state one characteristic which maybe fascinates me more than any other, was stick-to-itiveness. Just think, he bought his first piece of ground in 1895, he built his last thing in 1930. Boy, if I don't do it in a year or two, it's gone. My favorite quote, "These are the things I most value: a good reputation and the consciousness of having earned it by honest, long-time effort. A good conscience based on an earnest desire for the right occasionally attained, and a sincere repentance for the wrong forgiven." His philosophy was here. And it was followed by the men who followed after him, and they expanded it. L.N., Donald Gilmore, Gifford, our present Ted. And if we looked at the products that came out of these buildings downtown, which you've had so much to do with, we could talk about Kaopectate in 36, Unicap in 40, heparin in 42, the wound packet in 43, penicillin first production in 43. And we could go on to right up to the last product released, micronation. Upjohn has grown on this philosophy from a small pharmaceutical at $50,000 to $2+ billion. A leader in the world in plant and animal health. I'd like to share, if I may, with you one of my most valued possessions. I'm going to turn these off. And I have a videotape. The first section of this tape is in 1926 with W.E. Upjohn playing with his grandchildren. First grandchild you see is Martha, Ted's wife. Then you'll see Sue, Pete Parrish's wife, and the children. Then he will have different individuals. You'll see a tour with Water Selman of the lodge here. Then you'll see the Dayton Lights looking at the lodge. Then you'll see in 1930, when he is going west to make his decision, some of the officials of the company come down to the train to wave goodbye. And I shouldn't say this, but I get the urge of don't forget me. He's going to pick a president. And then the last little segment is at his home in Pasadena, which was in the movie Chinatown. It's only a 7-minute segment. And I'd like to share it with you.
There were many family gatherings at Brook Lodge, where Dr. W.E. and his second wife, Carol, made their summer home. In this group, we see the newest of his grandchildren, John Upjohn, carried in his grandfather's arms, and young Martha Gilmore, the same age, carried on her mother, here on the right. This is Carol and Grace Upjohn. Fortunate to have these pictures of Harold Upjohn because he died 2 years later following a surgical operation, the victim perhaps of the prolonged period of bed rest which was then common practice following abdominal surgery. Dr. W.E. bought the Brook Lodge property in 1895 when he was 42 years old. The feature that attracted him was a stream arising 2 miles to the west, which was dammed here to supply water power to a mill. Built probably in the 1840s, this mill and 2 others less than 3 miles away were of great importance to the early settlers of Ross Township. These small mills ground the wheat and the corn, separated the cream, and churned the butter. W.E. converted his water power to generate electricity and did not connect Brook Lodge to the Consumer's Power Service until 1920. He also piped water from the pond to supply the 3 lovely fountains which never stopped flowing winter and summer. Under his skillful treatment of the landscape, Brook Lodge became a charming summer residence. The creeks, the fountains, the waterfall, and the great spread of gardens combining to give music and color to a scene that has been a never-ending delight to visitors. When I brought all of the parts of this film together in the fall of 1979, I was excited to discover scenes that I had forgotten existed. Here is the doctor with Susie Delano. Janie and Sue. Myself with Mary and Carol. Donald running with the girls. And showing them the sundial that Harold and Arch Campbell had built in 1906. But the big discovery was the pictures that I took on my grandfather's 73rd birthday when he and Carol helped me to photograph a tour of the Brook Lodge property. The guests were Walter Selman, manager of the Upjohn office in San Francisco, and his wife, the tour started in the greenhouse. Then went out to the fields of peonies, which at that time covered some 14 acres and which bloomed during the first week in June on the doctor's birthday. Then across the lawns and the creeks, with a stop at the swimming pool. The last part of the tour was a visit to the rock gardens which covered the hillside above the pond. As we go around Brook Lodge again, this time with the Dayton lights, I am reminded of the great patience shown by the doctor and his wife with their many visitors. I think especially of Grandmother Carroll, who was wonderful to all of the doctor's children and grandchildren, and to their many friends and relatives. She looked after all of us with affection and never forgot any of our birthdays. Just before Christmas, Dr. W.E. and Carol left for California to spend the winter months at their home in Pasadena. The family was gathered for the send-off, and about a dozen of the doctor's associates at the Upjohn Company came to the railroad station to say goodbye. Granddad and Carol would not return to Kalamazoo until spring. Seen from the air, the Pasadena house was a gardener's paradise, and Dr. W.E. was proud to show it off. Two Michigan physicians. W.E. was born in 1853, the ninth child of Maria Mills and Uriah Upjohn. He was now 77 years old. 2 years later, in the fall of 1932, he died following a series of heart attacks. His wife, Carol, and these are the last pictures that we have of our favorite ancestor.